like all kinds of perception, as a psychologist, I became, as an undergraduate psychologist, I became very aware that seeing and hearing and understanding are not objective processes. That there's a kind of physiological bit of the process, which is the acoustic reception of air vibration. So the movement of air, of sound through air, is a kind of measurable physical process, and it's dependent on what kind of medium the sound is moving through, whether it's moving through water, whether it's moving through solids or whatever, and the speed and the density of the air or the material and the temperature and so on. And that's fairly robust. The second stage, about the interpretation and understanding of those vibrations, is actually very much a psychological process, a psychoacoustic process. So being able to listen to vibrating air and hear a bass, or hear a violin, or hear a voice, is actually what goes on inside our heads. And if you'd never heard a voice, or you'd never heard a cello, and an awful lot of people that we produce music for can't make the distinction between a cello and an electric bass because they've never learnt how they sound different. And certainly we might struggle to make the difference between an electric bass and an acoustic bass. So there's a psychological process involved in making sense of what you're hearing and understanding it. And I'm frequently amazed that in listening to kind of things and playing them to other people, and family members, some of whom are not musical, or claim not to be very musical, will then say, no, I can't hear that. And I'm kind of thinking, how can you not hear that? But then if you took me to the Tate and showed me a photograph and said, or a painting or whatever, and said the same thing about the painting, I'd probably frown and say, no, sorry, I can't see the pastel work in that. It's something we learn, it's something we kind of make sense of. And it plays tricks on us. Just as kind of visual images can play tricks, then acoustic images can play tricks as well. Now you look at that, and I mean, we can tell it's an illusion, but what tells you that's an illusion when you look at it?
Children are much bigger than adults.
Yeah. So we call on a belief system, which is actually children are not usually bigger than adults, or small children don't usually have a beard. They go on the left-hand side. So we recognise it as an illusion because what we see doesn't make sense with what we know. But what is there about what we're seeing that kind of makes it look as if the youngster on the right-hand side is taller?
The room, the familiarity of the room.
Yeah. Yeah, because
it's like they're all against the back
It's
wall.
the forced perspective.
That's right. Yeah, and in fact, you probably see these kind of rooms in exhibitions and so on. We can see a horizontal line across the back of the room, which we take to be a horizontal line as the back of the room. In fact, it isn't in this room. It kind of tapers away. So that's the optical illusion. But our expectation is the top corner of a wall is usually parallel or at right angles to the side wall and so on. So that interpretation of this is what we're expecting, this is what we actually see, and then, hang on, our memory tells us that what we're seeing doesn't match. So we kind of say, that's funny. It's an illusion. It's kind of confusing. The same kind of thing can happen with sound. And the capacity to play with sound that we've got, certainly digitally now, allows us to produce all kinds of illusions out of sound in the same way. And some of them will work and will create something that looks like a great picture. And some of them might produce, if you like, the acoustic equivalent of this, where it actually just doesn't fit together. And we kind of listen to it and think, well, yeah, I can hear everything, but it just sounds a bit weird, in the same way as that looks a bit weird. Yeah? So our senses get fooled by expectation, expecting things to be a particular way. And it's true of kind of musical arrangements and so on. We tend to expect the lead vocal to be louder than the bass drum. But it doesn't have to be, but that's kind of what we expect to happen in a mix. There's no reason why it should be, and some pieces of music might decide not to do that, to challenge a listener or to shift those expectations. And we also tend to extrapolate sometimes. We see a bit of a piece of information or hear a bit of a piece of information, and then we add what we think we know about that from past experience or from past knowledge. And so we add our past experience and our history to that in order to make sense of it. And there's also a tendency in human beings, this is what's called kind of gestalt theory, there's a tendency to complete things which are incomplete, to hear missing syllables in words, or to pick up beats which are not there but should have been there because all the other ones either side of it have been there, and kind of fill in the gaps. So if I just jump on a minute, let's just go back. What did you see then?
3 Pac-Man type things.
Yeah. Anybody see anything else?
Black triangle.
Which,
Yeah.
it looked like there was a triangle shape in it.
Yeah. And one of the things, because triangles are more familiar, as soon as I put this up I thought, shit, Pac-Man, everybody's going to do it. When I did this with kind of undergraduate psychologists long before Nintendos and so on, everybody kind of said, oh, Black Triangle, because there wasn't Pac-Man. But because people have seen Pac-Man since then, they now see that. But the completion is, there's no black triangle there at all. There's 3 circles with a bit missing out of it, but we complete it by adding information that our experience tells us about. So we see the triangle in there as well. Another example of something similar. Yeah. There's a sphere implied by those objects, but actually there's no sphere in that picture at all. So other information can kind of lead us to see something that may not be there. And the same kind of thing can happen with acoustics as well. There's another example of something similar. We get some of the information. Yeah. This went round in emails not too long ago, so you might have seen this before. Yeah. It's not true. Nobody at Cambridge University has ever done this, but it kind of makes it look more impressive if you build that word in there, isn't it? And this is kind of about the beginning and end of the word. First letter and the last letter is there, and it makes it kind of clear that because we don't read every letter in a word, we recognise the shape of a word, and so we fill in the gaps. Now, if we do it with things that we see, if we do it with reading, it kind of makes sense we're going to do it with listening as well. We're going to do it with what we hear. And there's going to be subconscious processing going on, adding bits of information and making sense of its information in the background when we listen to any piece of music. Interestingly, of course, they run into problems when they're down to 2 and 3 letter words because they can't be mixed up in the same way. And there are. I was going through this morning trying to look. Are there any other words in there that could be other than what they say? And actually, there aren't that many. Anybody who's good at anagrams have probably spotted them. I'm not so good at those kind of things. So we're making kind of summaries. Here's another example. This came from a lady called Penny Crum, who presented something at the AES, the Audio Engineers Symposium, a couple of years ago. So I've kind of pinched it from her. I think it's worth them to listen to it. Most of you will know this song.
If there's a bustle in your head, don't be alone there. It's just this sprinkly for the main queen.
I guess everybody knows this, I won't play it all, but you may remember this and a number of other songs were kind of picked on by fundamentalist religious groups in the States, kind of suggesting that there were satanic lyrics in these, if you played them backwards. And I know that Ozzy Osbourne was also accused of this, so if you listen to it backwards, see whether you can spot them. Anybody hear anything?
Just a couple of scenes.
Yeah. This is what Penny thought was in there. And if I play it again, whilst those lyrics are up on the screen. Can you see it now? Yeah. But it wasn't there when you were just listening to it without a kind of interpretation or a prompt to say, actually, this is what you're looking for. Then probably 50–60% of those words think, yeah, actually, I can hear that now. But I couldn't hear it through the first time through. Yeah, that was from Penny Crum, who's an audio engineer in the States. So, by now you're probably thinking, what the hell has this got to do with mixing? Which is what I wanted to move on to. And I was kind of thinking, well, why do we mix? Why have we finished up sitting at a mixing desk, pushing faders up and down, or sitting at the screen with a mouse, moving faders up and down, trying to produce something that sounds right? And I suppose mixing has got a kind of number of functions, but it started when we moved away from the need to record everything in one go. At the time when people were cutting direct to wax cylinders, or going kind of direct to shellac, or recording direct to disc, as Abbey Road was originally set up to do. Mixing was done by you spread your musicians out in the room, and the ones you wanted to be prominent stood very close to this big metal horn and sang straight into it, and your drummer was at the back of the room as far away as possible to allow his sound to disperse a bit. And so the mix was done acoustically. There was no kind of relative mixing of acoustic sources post-recording. It was all done pre-recording, and probably also done by the guy who was arranging the piece to make sure that there wasn't too much going on at any one time, or that the trumpet wasn't playing a loud melodic line over the top of the vocal line. So it's kind of, mixing I suppose has emerged as a kind of side effect of just the process about how we record stuff. So some of these ideas are applicable, I think, because there are similar expectations about some of what we hear. Some of the expectations that we have about what we see and what we read and so on feed into what we do when we set out to mix. And those expectations give us the information that allow us to distinguish an upright bass from an electric bass. In our history of being able to watch somebody play one, listen to somebody play one, tell us what, okay, this is what an upright bass is supposed to sound like, this is what an electric bass is supposed to sound like. So we've got some expectations there to start with. And also the process of how do we decide what's a lead instrument, what is the accompaniment in a piece, how do we then balance the levels of lead and accompaniment, how do they fit together. And straight away, and this kind of leads me back a number of times in mixing, is kind of thinking, well, actually that's also an arrangement issue. But as a mixing engineer, most of the arranging, if you're only working as a mixing engineer, most of the arranging has actually already been done by the time the piece arrives with you. If you're a composer, come mixing, you also have the opportunity to go back and say, actually that would sound better if that bass went an octave lower for that line, leaves a bit of space for the viola part or whatever, you know. So there's that crossover between mixing and arranging as well. Yeah, how do we decide what's distorted and what's clean? This is more complicated than it might first sound, because the distinction between a clean sound and a distorted sound is very apparent to an engineer. If you listen to a clip sound, where the mic preamp's been turned up far too loud and the source is clipped, and it's a vocal, it's very recognisable. But there are some instruments which kind of sound like that most of the time. Has anybody ever heard anybody play a hurdy-gurdy? Yeah, and hurdy-gurdy kind of has a built-in fuzz box. There's a clip. I think it's the bridge that rattles, isn't it? There's kind of something on the bow bit.
I'm not sure what it is. They have sympathetic strings or something.
Yeah, there's a long drone string, I think, and it has a bridge which deliberately doesn't fit properly on the body. So as you drive it, it rattles and it produces this brilliant loud sound, but it sounds like a fuzz box. And I was recently mixing a recording that my son did, playing with a funk band in Cambridge. And sitting in the chorus of one of the songs, desperately trying to work out where the distortion was coming from, because it was the singer had stopped singing, there was a horn, a brass break, and I could not work out what was clipping. I thought one of the trombones was overdriving the mic preamps. And then went through the mics kind of soloing, and went back to the vocal mic, which actually was no longer singing it, and discovered that the singer was playing a kazoo along with the brass part. He was playing it very well, he was in time, he was in key, but a kazoo sounds like a distorted mic preamp. And I heard it as distortion, but when I heard it as a kazoo, I thought, oh, that sounds fine. Just push it down in the mix a little bit, add a bit of bottom to it, it sounds like the bottom end of the trombones, and it sounded fine. So hearing it as distortion made me want to hunt it out. Producing another explanation of what it was made me think, oh, fine, it can stay there. It doesn't, and it kind of reflected on me as, oh, terrible engineer, I've had the gain turned up too low and I've clipped a mic preamp. So, why do we do mixes? I think there are kind of three potential processes. The first one is it can be a creative process. Remixing, when I first got into recording, just meant going back to the same recording and having another go because you didn't get it right the first time and the bass was too low or whatever. Remixing now, to my kids, actually means a whole new drum beat, maybe a different tempo, maybe in a different key, maybe with a vocal shifted up an octave, or drum and bass part behind it, or whatever. So remixing can be a creative process where you're actually taking apart a mix and adding other instruments. And I'm not going to talk much about that. It can be a corrective process in that it might mean kind of replacing bits of the recording that didn't work too well, replacing vocals, or maybe using the bass drum to trigger a sample because the bass drum's a bit woolly or it's spilling over into other things, or the snare's getting into the bass drum mic or whatever. And the third one, which I think is a major part of most recordings that we do, particularly if, maybe like me, when you're doing recording, not a lot of it goes down all at the same time. That you're either using virtual instruments, or you're overdubbing the same person playing more than one instrument, or different people but not playing all at the same time, and so you're kind of compensating for what's an unnatural recording process. I know unnatural is maybe it's kind of a controversial word, but a natural recording process. I was thinking of a stereo recording of all the musicians playing at the same time, and what you record is a representation of what you actually heard of the performance. So it's all going down in one go, and some of the mixing process is an attempt to recreate something that sounds like that. Now, obviously, some kinds of music make no attempt to do that, and what's being recorded doesn't represent, could never have been done live. But some of those techniques still need to be in there. So, the hearing process itself.